Darkness swallowed the white sands of Tularosa Basin, the moon a sliver too weak to betray, the small figure stumbling across the dunes. Samuel Redsky's bare feet kicked up plumes of gypsum dust. With each desperate stride, his lungs burning his vision, tunneling to a single point of focus, the ridge ahead, where mesquite shadows promised cover he wouldn't reach in time. The horses behind him sounded like thunder wrapped in malice. Three riders, their laughter cutting through the September night like broken glass. A gunshot cracked the air. Sand exploded 2 feet to Samuel's left. The boy pitched forward, 8 years old and 20 pounds too light, his shirt soaked through with blood that wasn't all his own. The men closing in were the casual cruelty of those who'd done this before. Their leader, a thick-shouldered brute with a scar splitting his left eyebrow, spurred his mount faster. Another shot. Closer. Samuel's legs gave out. He hit the sand face first, tasting copper and salt, and the bitter certainty of what came next. Crawling now, fingernails clawing at earth that offered no mercy, no purchase, no salvation. The horses circled. Boots hit the ground with dull thuds. Spurs jingled. Someone coughed and spat. The scarred man cocked his pistol, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden stillness. Then a different gunshot split the night, and the man to the scarred leader's right folded sideways off his horse, clutching his thigh, screaming. Cole Garrison emerged from the shadow of a boulder, 30 yards out, his rifle barrel, still smoking his limp, pronounced as he closed the distance with a predator's patience. The weapon he carried was a Winchester 73, and the way he held it suggested the first shot hadn't been luck. The scarred man swung his pistol toward this new threat. Cole's voice carried across the sand, low and steady, the kind of tone that made smart men reconsider their choices. My partner's in those rocks with a Winchester. You boys got about 5 seconds to decide if tonight's the night you die for Jack Brennan's money. No partner existed. No Winchester waited in the rocks. But the desert darkness was vast, and fear was a poison that spread fast among men who knew they weren't the only predators hunting these dunes. The scarred man's eyes darted to the boulder field, to his wounded companions still screaming, to the small fortune Brennan had promised for delivering the boy. Cole began counting. 5. The math was simple. Unknown number of rifles in the dark. One boy worth maybe $50. Their lives worth considerably more. 4. The wounded man was trying to mount his horse, failing cursing in a steady stream. 3. The scarred man holstered his weapon, grabbed his companion by the collar, and hauled him onto a saddle. They rode hard toward Red Hollow dust, trailing behind them like the coward's flag it was. Samuel hadn't moved. Couldn't move. The sand beneath him was cold now. Or maybe that was shock setting in, stealing the heat from his small body. Cole approached slowly, a rifle lowered but ready. He'd seen enough frightened creatures, animal and human, to know that cornered things bite. Easy now, son. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. The boy's eyes were wild, unfocused. Dehydration had painted dark circles beneath them. Fresh rope burns circled his wrists, the kind that came from being dragged behind horses. Older scars mapped his back through the torn fabric of his shirt, systematic and deliberate, and the signature of Jack Brennan's particular brand of discipline. Cole knelt 3 feet away, movements careful and unthreatening. He pulled his canteen free, uncapped it, set it on the sand within the boy's reach. Drink, slow, too much too fast, and you'll just bring it back up. Samuel's hands shot out, trembling so badly, water sloshed over the rim as he lifted the canteen to his cracked lips. He gulped, choked, gulped again. Cole let him finish half before gently pulling it back. More in a minute. First, let me see your back. The boy flinched away, a wordless snarl escaping his throat. Cole held up both hands, showing empty palms. I was Army. I know field medicine. Those wounds get infected. You'll be dead in 3 days. Something in Samuel's eyes shifted. Not trust. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, but calculation. This man had driven away the hunters. This man offered water. This man spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen death and knew its timelines. Samuel turned, presenting his back. The whip marks were recent, some still weeping clear fluid. Burns dotted his shoulders, the perfect circles of cigarette cruelty. Cole's jaw tightened, but his hands stayed gentle as he poured water over the worst wounds, using a relatively clean section of his own shirt sleeve to dab away dried blood and dirt. You got a name, Silence. I'm Cole. I live about 10 miles from here. Got a ranch, some horses, a well that still produces water. You come with me, I'll feed you, let you rest. After that, you decide what happens next. The boy's shoulders remained rigid, but something in his posture had shifted from pure terror to wary exhaustion. Cole wrapped the boy in his wool riding coat, the fabric swallowing Samuel's small frame. He lifted the child onto his horse with practiced ease, the kind that came from years of handling skittish colts. Samuel didn't resist, too depleted to maintain defiance. The ride back took 30 minutes through terrain Cole knew by heart. The ranch appeared as lamplight in distance, first a warm glow that seemed impossibly fragile against the vast darkness of the basin. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight and steady in the still air. As they approached, the front door opened. The woman who stood in the threshold was all sharp angles and watchful eyes, her long black hair plaited in a single braid that fell past her waist. She wore a simple cotton dress, but the knife sheathed at her hip and the coiled readiness in her stance marked her as something other than domestic. Nalin Redsky had been living at Cole's ranch for exactly 1 week. 7 days since he'd thrown money at Jack Brennan in the Copper Spur Saloon and told a bound woman he was setting her free, no strings attached. 7 days of careful distance and fragile peace, of unspoken agreements about locked doors and personal space. She descended the porch steps as Cole reined in his horse, her eyes on the bundle in his arms. Then Samuel's head emerged from the coat and the world stopped. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. A sound escaped her throat, something between a gasp and a wail, raw and ancient and terrible. She caught herself against the porch rail, hand white-knuckled on weathered wood. Cole dismounted, holding Samuel steady. The boy's eyes had opened focus now, and the moment they found his sister's face, every wall he'd built shattered. Nalin. Her name barely a whisper, but it carried 2 years of grief and the impossible weight of a child who'd believed himself alone. She ran, not walked, not stumbled, but ran with the desperate speed of someone reclaiming what death had stolen. Her arms wrapped around her brother before Cole could even lower him from the saddle, pulling him against her chest with enough force to make the boy gasp. She was speaking in Apache now, words tumbling out too fast for Cole to follow, even if he'd understood the language. Her face was pressed against Samuel's hair, tears streaming unchecked as she rocked him, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than lungs. Samuel's small hands fisted in her dress, holding on with the grip of the drowning. They stood that way for long minutes, reunited siblings in the lamplight, the mathematics of their survival incomprehensible and precious. Cole held the horse's reins and gave them space, his own throat tight with something he couldn't name. When Nalin finally pulled back enough to look at Samuel's face, her hands were trembling as they traced his features as if confirming his solidity. They told me you were dead. Crow said you fell, said your body wasn't worth retrieving. Samuel's voice was hoarse, damaged. I tried to find you every day, but the soldiers were everywhere, and then Crow's men caught me, and they put me in the basement with the others. Her face went rigid. What others? So many. 20, maybe more. Children, all, Apache, some Mexican. We sort ore all day. They brand us so we can't run. He turned, and even through the coat, the raised flesh on his shoulder was visible. Nalin looked at Cole, then really looked at him, and something passed between them. An understanding. This was bigger than one rescue, one boy. This was systematic and ongoing, and somewhere in Red Hollow, 20 more children were sorting ore by lamplight, their small hands bleeding their futures, a darkness that would consume them completely. Cole hitched his horse and followed them inside. The ranch house was modest, a single large room with a sleeping alcove sectioned off by a curtain, a stone fireplace, and a table that had seen better decades. Nalin settled Samuel near the fire, refusing to release his hand even as she moved. Cole filled a pot with water, set it to boil. From a shelf, he retrieved the medical kit he'd carried since his cavalry days, the leather case worn, but its contents meticulously maintained. Bandages, carbolic acid, laudanum needle and thread. The boy needs Doc McKenzie. Those wounds could go septic. Nalin was already working her movements, practiced and efficient. From a pouch at her belt, she produced dried plants Cole didn't recognize, crushing them between her palms and adding them to the hot water. The scent that rose was sharp and medicinal, something between sage and mint, but earthier. My mother taught me, this will fight infection better than your white man's medicine. Cole didn't argue. He'd seen enough frontier remedies that worked to know formal education wasn't the only path to healing. While Nolan tended her brother's wounds, Cole stepped outside and sent a ranch hand to fetch Doc McKenzie from his homestead 5 miles south. The old physician was the only medical care within 50 miles, and he owed Cole more than a few favors. When Cole returned, Samuel was lying on a bedroll near the fire, Nalen's hand stroking his hair, as she sang something low and rhythmic in Apache. The boy's eyes were closing, exhaustion finally claiming him. Nellen looked up, and for the first time since Cole had bought her freedom a week ago, something other than wariness lived in her gaze. Why did you go after him? I heard about Brennan's men chasing someone in the basin. Figured it was a deer poacher. When I saw it was a child, you could have died. Could have. Didn't. She studied him for a long moment. You were there. Canyon de Chelly, 1880. I can hear it in the way you move. See it in how you held that rifle. Cole's chest constricted. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, but he'd hoped for more than 7 days of peace before the past demanded its accounting. I was there. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them. Were you one of the soldiers who killed my family? I was perimeter guard. I heard the screaming. I didn't go into the main encampment. I didn't fire on women or children. He paused, forcing himself to continue. But I didn't stop the men who did. I followed orders to secure the perimeter, and I told myself that was enough. That I could be present at a massacre and walk away clean, because I didn't personally pull triggers on unarmed people. Her jaw had gone tight, and her hand on Samuel's hair had stilled. So you knew. All week you knew what you were. What you'd been part of. Cole met her eyes, refusing the coward's comfort of looking away. I knew I'd served in the unit that executed operations at Canyon de Chelly. I didn't know you were from there until just now. But yes, I knew that when I bought your freedom, I was trying to make something right that can never be right. Samuel stirred in his sleep, whimpering. Nalan's attention snapped back to her brother, her hand resuming its soothing motion through his hair. When she spoke again, her voice was ice over steel. For Samuel, only for Samuel. After he's well, we leave. You never see us again. Cole nodded once. Fair enough. The sound of hooves announced Doc McKenzie's arrival. The physician was 70 if he was a day white-bearded and skeptical of everything except whiskey and his own experience. He took one look at Samuel's back and whistled low. Brennan's work. I'd recognize it anywhere. Third kid this month. Cole's head snapped up. Third Doc was already mixing something in his kit, his gnarled fingers surprisingly deft. Maria Santos brought me a Mexican boy 2 weeks back. Same brands, same whip patterns. And before that, a Navajo girl. Different mine companies, same contractor. Brennan's cornered the market on child labor in this territory. He glanced at Cole, then at Nalen. Whatever you're planning, count me in. I'm too old to keep stitching up children and pretending this is normal. Nalan's response was immediate. We're not planning anything. We're leaving. Doc applied a poultice to Samuel's worst wounds, then wrapped them in clean bandages. Leave if you want. But Brennan won't forget. He never does. That boy was his property, legally speaking. He'll come for him, and when he comes, he'll bring enough men to make sure nobody interferes again. Cole watched the realization cross Nalan's face. They couldn't run far enough or fast enough. Brennan had connections across the territory, and a fugitive Apache woman with a branded child would be reported by every sheriff and settler who saw them. Doc McKenzie packed his kit, accepted the coffee Cole offered, and settled into a chair with the air of a man who'd decided to stay a while. There's more you should know. That brand on the boy's shoulder, RH Mining Company. Red Hollow Mining, owned by Silas Whitmore. The name landed like a stone in still water. Whitmore's been buying up every ranch in the basin, 20 properties in the last year, and he's not paying fair prices. My neighbor refused to sell 3 months back. 2 weeks later, his barn burned down with him in it. Sheriff called it an accident. Cole had heard the name but never connected it to the systematic land acquisition changing the face of Tularosa Basin. He'd assumed it was the usual frontier capitalism, not something darker and more coordinated. What does Whitmore want with all this land water rights? The basin's got 3 natural springs. Control those, you control everything. Railroad is coming through in 2 years, maybe 3. Whoever owns the water can name their price to the railroad companies. Doc took a long sip of coffee. Your ranch sits on one of those springs, Cole. That makes you a problem Whitmore intends to solve. Nayland had been listening silently, her hand never leaving Samuel's shoulder. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd already lost everything once and knew the cost of standing still. Then we're all dead. If we stay, Brennan comes for Samuel. If we run, Whitmore's men hunt us down. If we fight, we're three people against an army. Samuel chose that moment to wake his eyes fever bright and unfocused. He looked at his sister, then at Cole, then at the unfamiliar ceiling above him. Run! The single word came out hoarse and desperate. Nayland leaned close, switching to Apache. Cole couldn't follow the exchange, but the terror in Samuel's voice needed no translation. The boy was trying to sit up, panic overriding pain, his small hands pushing against his sister's attempts to keep him lying down. Finally, Nayland switched back to English, her face ashen. He heard them. Tonight before he escaped. Brennan and his men talking about tomorrow. They're coming here, 20 men. They're going to burn the ranch, kill you, and take us back. Doc Mackenzie set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care. Tomorrow, as in less than 24 hours from now. Samuel nodded, tears streaming down his face. Brennan said, make it loud, make it a lesson. Said, kill the Indian whore and the crippled soldier, make sure nobody else tries to be a hero. The room went silent except for the fire's crackle and Samuel's labored breathing. Cole stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkness that had suddenly become tactical terrain. 20 men was too many to fight head-on, but too few to be a proper military unit. They'd come confident, expecting an easy target. That confidence could be weaponized. We don't have to win. We just have to make it expensive enough that they quit. Doc Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. You got a death wish, I don't know about Cole. Turned, and something in his face made the old physician sit back. I got a ranch worth defending, child who deserves better than Brennan's basement, and about 16 hours to turn this place into something those men will regret attacking. Nellen had been watching him, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, it was measured and calculating. You know tactics, military thinking, but you don't know how to disappear, how to hit from shadows, how to make 20 men afraid of 3. Cole tilted his head, listening. Apache don't win by standing and fighting. We win by being where the enemy isn't striking, where they're weakest, making them jump at every shadow until they break. Doc Mackenzie looked between them. So we're actually doing this. We're defending against 20 armed men with 2 rifles and a prayer. Cole moved to a locked trunk in the corner, produced a key from his pocket, and opened it. Inside, carefully maintained, were his cavalry-issue weapons, a second Winchester, 2 Colt revolvers, ammunition boxes, and something else wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. The Spencer repeating rifle had seen action from the Civil War through the Indian campaigns. 7 rounds, lever action, accurate at distances that made men nervous. Nellen stepped closer, her eyes on the weapons. You kept your soldier tools. Cole's voice was quiet. I kept the means to defend what's mine. She nodded once, a decision made. Then we defend it together. Apache tactics, your weapons. Doc's medical knowledge. And when this is over, Samuel and I leave. Deal? Cole extended his hand. She looked at it for a long moment before taking it, her grip firm. Deal. Doc Mackenzie groaned as he stood. I'll spread the word. Maria Santos has been wanting to settle scores with these bastards. Few other families might join if they know what's at stake. The physician left, and Cole began planning. Nellen put Samuel back to bed, singing softly until the boy slipped into an exhausted sleep. Then she joined Cole at the table where he'd spread a rough map of the ranch property. 3 approaches. The main road from Red Hollow, the creek bed from the east, and the ridge trail from the south. We can't cover all 3. Nellen studied the map, then pointed. We don't cover. We channel. Block this road with a fence break, make it look natural. Block the creek bed with... What do you have that burns bright and hot? Cole considered. Hay bales soaked in kerosene. She nodded. Force them down the ridge trail, narrow passage, high walls. We position on the walls, rain down arrows and bullets. They're trapped in a killing zone. It was brutal. It was clever. It was exactly the kind of asymmetric warfare that had made the Apache impossible to pin down for decades. They worked through the night, Cole and Nayland and Doc Mackenzie, when he returned with Maria Santos and 2 other ranchers, weathered men who'd lost brothers to Whitmore's accidents and were ready to settle accounts. By dawn, the trap was set. The main road had a section of fence that would collapse under weight-blocking passage. The creek bed was rigged with hay bales and trip lines. The ridge trail remained open, beckoning seemingly the easiest approach. On the canyon walls above that trail, firing positions had been prepared. Rocks stacked for cover, sight lines cleared, ammunition distributed. 6 defenders against 20 attackers, but the terrain would be their ally. Nolan found Cole as the sun broke the horizon, painting the white sands gold. Your wife, the one who died. What would she think of this? Cole's hand tightened on the Winchester stock. She'd think I finally chose to fight for something that mattered, instead of following orders I didn't believe in. Nellen absorbed this, then asked the question that had been building since the night before. If you'd seen my mother running at Canyon de Shelley, would you have shot her? Cole wanted to lie, wanted to offer her the comfort of a clean answer. But he'd promised himself after Mary's death that he was done lying, even when lies were kinder. I don't know, the man I was then, I can't speak for him with any certainty. But I know the man I am now would die before letting that happen again. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was honest, and honesty was all he had left to give. Samuel appeared in the doorway, moving slowly, favoring his bandaged back. He looked at the armed men and women preparing for battle at the canyon wall, bristling with hidden positions, and at his sister and Cole standing together over a map. Are we going to die? Cole knelt to the boy's level. Not if I can help it, son. Samuel studied his face with the unsettling directness of children who'd learned early to read adults for signs of truth or deception. Brennan told us you always die if you fight back. That's why none of the other children try to run. Nalen's voice was fierce as she joined them. Brennan lied. Fighting back is the only reason we're alive. The only reason you're standing here instead of in that basement. The boy considered this, then nodded. Can I help? Cole and Nellen exchanged glances. You can stay in the root cellar with the other children. Keep them calm. Keep them quiet. That's the most important job. Samuel's small shoulders straightened. I can do that. By mid-morning, 5 more families had arrived, word having spread through the network of ranchers and settlers who knew Whitmore's pattern. 15 adults total, plus 8 children who would shelter in the root cellar beneath the ranch house. The odds were better. Still bad, but better. Maria Santos, a Mexican widow who ran the general store in Red Hollow, had brought her late husband's rifle and a determination that made even the hardened ranchers uncomfortable. She found Nolan checking bowstring tension on an Apache shortbow. I heard what you did to Brennan's men last year, the ones who tried to take you the first time. Nolan's hand stilled. I survived. Maria's smile was sharp as broken glass. You put one in the hospital for 3 months and made the other 2 afraid to sleep without checking under their beds. That's more than surviving. That's sending a message. She paused, then added quietly, my husband refused to sell to Whitmore. They found his body in a ditch 2 weeks later. Sheriff said it was bandits. I know better. Nalen met her eyes. Then today we send a different message. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. Every defender took positions, checking weapons, adjusting sight lines, settling into the particular tension that precedes violence. Cole walked the perimeter once more, making final adjustments. Doc McKenzie had set up a field hospital in the ranch house, bandages and instruments laid out with grim efficiency. The old physician caught Cole's arm as he passed. I've known you 3 years, watched you rebuild this place from nothing, never seen you care about anything except keeping your head down and your past buried. Cole waited. Whatever changed in the last week, it looks good on you. Before Cole could respond, a shout came from the western lookout. Riders, multiple hostiles approaching. Everyone froze, then moved with practiced speed to their assigned positions. Children filed into the root cellar, Samuel the last to descend, his face pale but set with determination. Cole took position on the canyon wall, Nalen beside him. Below, the ridge trail stretched empty and inviting. 23 riders appeared on the horizon, backlit by the noon sun. They moved with the casual confidence of men who'd done this before and expected no real resistance. Jack Brennan led them, his scarred face visible even at distance. Captain James Thornton rode beside him, military posture unchanged even in civilian clothes. The rest were a mix of professional guns and desperate men who'd take Whitmore's money and not ask questions. Cole watched them approach the block main road, saw confusion as they discovered the collapsed fence. They circled to try the creek bed. The kerosene-soaked hay bales ignited right on schedule, flames jumping 20 feet high, thick black smoke making the passage impossible. That left the ridge trail. Brennan led them toward it exactly as planned. The narrow canyon walls rose 40 feet on either side, creating the perfect funnel. The riders entered single file, still confident but now wary. When the first man reached the midpoint, Nalin gave a sharp whistle. Arrows flew first, silent and deadly. 3 riders went down before the gunfire started. Then the defenders opened up with rifles, the canyon walls amplifying the sound until it seemed like 100 guns firing instead of 15. Brennan's men scattered trying to retreat, but Maria Santos and her people had closed the canyon entrance behind them with a wagon they'd rolled into place. Trapped. The defenders held the high ground, could pick their shots, reload and cover. The attackers were exposed, their horses panicking, trampling men who'd fallen. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter wearing the skin of self-defense. 5 minutes of hell, and then Brennan's men broke completely. Those who could ride smashed through the wagon barricade, fleeing back toward Red Hollow. Those who couldn't ran on foot, weaponless and terrified. The canyon floor held bodies. 10 men down, dead or dying. The rest scattered to the 4 winds. Cole descended carefully, rifle ready, checking each fallen man. Most were dead. 2 were wounded badly enough that survival was uncertain. One was the scarred man from the night before, clutching a stomach wound and cursing with impressive creativity. Brennan himself had fled, coat on fire, from a lucky shot near the hay bales. Thornton had stayed mounted and escaped in the initial chaos. The defenders emerged from their positions, faces grim with what they'd done and what it meant. Killing an abstract was one thing. Bodies bleeding into New Mexico dirt was another. Maria Santos looked at the carnage and spat. They came for murder. They got justice. Doc McKenzie was already moving among the wounded attackers, his physician's oath forcing him to tend even men who'd come to kill them. Cole helped, knowing that each man they saved was a witness, proof that the defenders had fought only as hard as necessary. Nolan found Cole as he was dragging a wounded man toward the ranch house. This isn't over. Brennan's alive. Thornton's alive. They'll bring more men. Cole knew she was right. They'd won the battle by surprising confident men with prepared defenses. Next time the attackers would come ready for a real fight. We've got maybe 48 hours before they regroup. We use that time to get the children somewhere safe, fortify what we can, and find leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes powerful men vulnerable. Evidence witnesses something that forces them to back off or face consequences bigger than they can threaten away. Samuel emerged from the root cellar, followed by the other children. He looked at the bodies, at the blood soaking into white sand, and his small face remained eerily calm. Did we win? Cole knelt beside him. We survived. That's winning for today. The boy nodded, processing this new mathematics of victory. The defenders gathered in the ranch house as sunset painted the basin orange and red. 10 families, 15 adults, 8 children. Exhausted, traumatized, but alive. Doc McKenzie stood, his white beard stained with blood from the emergency surgeries he'd performed on friend and enemy alike. We just killed 10 men. Self-defense or not, that brings federal attention. Sheriff Hayes will have to respond, probably already sending telegrams to Santa Fe. Maria Santos had been quiet since the battle, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision. Now she spoke. My nephew works in the territorial clerk's office in Santa Fe. He's seen things, papers, evidence of what Whitmore's doing. Everyone turned to look at her. What kind of evidence? Documents showing the Canyon de Chelly massacre wasn't military necessity. It was paid for. Whitmore gave the territorial governor $50,000 to clear Apache land for railroad access. The room went still. Nalen's hand found Samuel's shoulder, gripping tight enough to make the boy wince. Cole's voice was carefully controlled. Your nephew has proof of this. Maria nodded. Written orders, payment receipts, witness statements from soldiers who were there. Everything needed to bring down Whitmore, the governor, and every official who helped cover it up. Doc McKenzie leaned forward. If that's true, we're not just defending a ranch. We're sitting on evidence that could expose the biggest corruption scandal in territorial history. Cole looked at Nolan, seeing his own realization reflected in her face. This was bigger than land, bigger than Brennan's child slavery. This was the systematic machinery of violence and greed that had destroyed her family and 100 families like hers. Maria continued, my nephew wants to help, but the documents are in a locked office guarded, and Whitmore's already suspicious that someone's been looking at them. If we're going to get that evidence, we have to move fast. Nalen's voice cut through the discussion. Before we plan anything else, we get the children to safety. All of them. If Whitmore's willing to kill for land, he won't hesitate to kill children to protect himself. Agreement rippled through the room. They spent the next hours organizing. The children would be evacuated to a mission school 60 miles south, escorted by 2 armed families. The remaining defenders would hold the ranch and prepare for whatever came next. As families departed into the darkness, Samuel clung to Nalen. "You're coming too, right? You promised you wouldn't leave." She knelt, taking his face in her hands. "I have to stay, little brother, to make sure the bad men can't hurt any more children." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "That's what Mother said before the soldiers came. She said she'd come back." The words hit Nalen like a physical blow. Cole watched her struggle, watched her try to find promises she couldn't honestly make. He knelt beside them both. "Your sister's the bravest person I've ever met, and I'm going to protect her with my life. That's my promise to you, and I've never broken a promise." Samuel looked at Cole, evaluating, then turned back to Nalene. "If he breaks his promise, I'll never forgive him." Cole's response was immediate and honest. "If he breaks his promise, I'll never forgive myself." The boy finally nodded, allowing himself to be led toward the wagon that would take him south to safety. When the last family had departed, 8 adults remained. Cole Nalen, Doc McKenzie, Maria Santos, and 4 ranchers whose homes Whitmore had already burned or stolen. They gathered around the table where Cole's map still lay. Doc broke the silence. "So what now? We wait for federal marshals. Hope the law actually works this time." Maria's laugh was bitter. "The law has been protecting Whitmore for 2 years. The law called my husband's murder an accident. The law brands Apache children and calls it employment." One of the ranchers, a scarred man named Thompson, spoke up. "My son's in that mission school because Whitmore's men burned our homestead with us in it. We barely escaped. Law did nothing." Cole understood their anger, shared it, but anger without strategy was just suicide wearing a brave face. "We need that evidence," Maria mentioned. "Without proof, we're just outlaws who killed 10 men. With proof, we're witnesses to a conspiracy." Nalen had been studying the map, her fingers tracing roads. "Santa Fe's 3 days' ride. If Maria's nephew can get us building plans and guard schedules, we could infiltrate during the night, get the documents, be gone before anyone knows." Doc McKenzie shook his head. "That's a federal building. Break in there, you're not just fighting Whitmore anymore. You're federal fugitives, true?" Cole met Nalen's eyes across the table. In that look, an understanding passed between them. They were already fugitives the moment they defended against Brennan's attack. The only question was whether they'd be fugitives with evidence or fugitives with nothing. "We leave at dawn. 3 people, me, Nalen. 1 more. Small team moves fast, draws less attention." Maria stood. "I'm coming. It's my nephew, my contacts." Doc McKenzie reached for his rifle. "And I'm the oldest, most expendable one here. Let me do something useful before this territory kills me." They argued for another hour before settling the details. Thompson and the other ranchers would hold the ranch, make it look occupied and defended. The infiltration team would have 72 hours to get to Santa Fe, retrieve the documents, and return before federal marshals arrived to investigate the attack. As the others settled in for a few hours' sleep, Cole found Marlon on the porch watching stars wheel overhead. "You could still leave. Take Samuel and disappear into Mexico. Start new." She was quiet for a long time. "My mother used to say that wounds heal fastest when you stop picking at them. But some wounds don't heal. They just become scars you learn to carry." She turned to look at him. "For 2 years I've been running, hiding, surviving but not living. Today, for the first time, I fought back. And it felt right." Cole understood. He'd spent 3 years after Canyon de Chelly trying to bury himself in work and silence, trying to forget. It had never worked. "When we get those documents, when this is over." "What then?" Nalen smiled, sad and knowing. "Then we see if peace is possible, or if we're too broken to build anything that lasts." The sound of hooves made them both turn. A wagon rolled up in the pre-dawn darkness, Maria Santos at the reins. Beside her, wrapped in blankets, sat Samuel. Nalen was on her feet, instantly rushing toward the wagon. How Maria climbed down, her face apologetic but unyielding. "I intercepted them 5 miles out. The boy wouldn't stop crying, saying you'd promised never to leave him. The families escorting him were good people, but they understood. Some bonds can't be broken by well-meaning distance. Samuel climbed down carefully, his wounded back still tender, and walked to his sister. His voice was steady despite the tears. I came back. The bad men need to pay for what they did, and I need to help make that happen. Nolan knelt before him, torn between protecting him and honoring his courage. Little brother, this is dangerous, I know, but I'm not helpless, and I'm not leaving you again. Cole stepped forward, his hand on Samuel's shoulder. Then you stay, but you follow orders, no arguments, no exceptions. Samuel nodded, and for the first time in 2 years, something like hope flickered in his eyes. Maria handed Nolan a small packed food water, the wooden horse they'd carved together, for the road, and for after when he needs reminding that people keep their promises. The night deepened. Tomorrow they would ride toward evidence that could destroy Whitmore's empire or get them all killed. But tonight they had survived. They had fought back. And they had proven that even broken people could build something worth defending. Cole watched the stars and thought about Mary's suicide note about the man she'd said he'd become. That man had died today in the canyon, buried under the weight of the choice to protect rather than destroy. The man who remained was uncertain of his shape, but he knew one thing: he'd found something in this basin worth the cost of becoming. Nalen's hand found his in the darkness. Tomorrow we ride. Tomorrow they would ride toward justice or death, and neither of them knew which would arrive first. Dawn came too fast, painting the basin in shades of copper and ash. Cole saddled 3 horses, while Nolan prepared provisions for a journey that would demand speed over comfort. Doc McKenzie checked his medical kit one final time, his gnarled fingers moving with the efficiency of decades. Samuel watched from the porch, his small frame wrapped in a blanket against the desert morning chill. The boy's eyes tracked his sister's movements, with the intensity of someone who'd learned that people vanished when you stopped watching. Maria Santos arrived with her nephew's latest telegram clutched in her fist. The paper trembled as she read aloud. Documents moved yesterday. New location: Silas Whitmore's private office, 3rd floor territorial building. Security doubled. Window of opportunity closing. Cole absorbed this, recalculating. A private office meant tighter security, but also less traffic, fewer witnesses. The 3rd floor offered challenges for entry and escape, but height could be an advantage if they planned correctly. How long until your nephew can get us building layouts? Maria's expression darkened. He stopped responding 6 hours ago. Last message said someone was asking questions about who'd been accessing records. The implications settled heavy. Either Maria's nephew had been discovered, or he'd gone to ground, or something worse had happened in Santa Fe while they prepared. We ride anyway. Even if we're walking in blind, those documents are the only leverage we have. Nolan finished tying their supplies, her movements economical and sure. Blind walking gets people killed. We need intelligence backup plans, extraction routes. Doc McKenzie cleared his throat. I know a woman in Santa Fe, runs a boarding house near the plaza. She owes me for delivering her daughter 20 years back. We can stage from there, gather information before we move. It was something. Not much, but something. Cole nodded, swinging into his saddle. The leather creaked, familiar and grounding. Samuel stepped off the porch, moving toward his sister. You're leaving without saying goodbye. Nalen's face softened in ways Cole had never seen. She dismounted, knelt before her brother, taking his small hands in hers. I will come back. That's not goodbye, that's a promise. Samuel's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down his cheeks. Mother promised too. The words hung between them, undeniable and terrible. Nolan pulled her brother close, whispering something in Apache that made the boy's shoulders shake. When she released him, Samuel turned to Cole. You keep your word. You said you'd protect her. Cole met the boy's eyes, recognizing the weight of what was being asked. Not just physical protection, but something larger, a promise that the world could still hold people who meant what they said. I keep my word. They rode north as the sun climbed, 3 riders pushing hard across terrain that turned from white sand to scrubland to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinon. The distance to Santa Fe was 120 miles that would take most travelers 5 days. They had 3. By noon, they'd covered 30 miles, changing horses at a relay station run by an old cavalry friend who didn't ask questions when Cole showed up with an Apache woman and a grizzled physician. The fresh mounts cost them most of their ready cash, but speed mattered more than money now. They made camp that night in a box canyon that offered protection and concealment. Doc Mackenzie's bones protested the hard riding, but the old man refused to slow their pace. Nellen prepared a cold meal while Cole scouted their perimeter. When he returned, she was sitting apart from the fire, her knife out working at something in the dim light. He settled nearby, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to respect the distance she maintained. "What are you making?" She held up her work, a small wooden horse, rough carved, but recognizable, the kind of toy a child might treasure. "For Samuel. When we get back, something to hold when the nightmares come." Cole watched her hands move the knife blade, catching starlight as it shaved wood in precise curls. "You're good at that, my father taught me. Said idle hands make worried minds and worried minds make mistakes." She paused, studying the emerging shape. "He was carving the day the soldiers came. A bear for my youngest sister. He never finished it." The silence that followed was heavy with ghosts. Cole had learned over the past week that Nalen's grief came in waves, long stretches of focused control, punctuated by moments when the past crashed through her defenses. "I'm sorry" doesn't cover it. Never will. But I'm sorry anyway. Nalen's hand stilled. "You say that like you personally pulled triggers. But you didn't, did you? You stood guard while others murdered families, and you told yourself that following orders was the same as being innocent. The accusation was accurate enough to draw blood." Cole had spent 3 years dissecting his own complicity, finding new ways to condemn himself, but hearing it from someone whose family had died while he watched the perimeter carried a different weight. "I was 24. I'd been in the cavalry 2 years. My captain said we were protecting settlements from raids. We were heroes," he said, "keeping civilizations safe from savagery." He looked up at stars that didn't judge, didn't care. "Took me 6 months after Canyon de Shelley to understand I'd been part of something that had nothing to do with protection. By then I'd mustered out, bought this ranch with my discharge pay, tried to bury what I'd seen." Nalen resumed carving her knife, biting deeper. "And now you're writing to steal documents that might prove your captain was a murderer, that the government you served paid for genocide. What does that make you, someone trying to be better than I was? That's all any of us can do." She considered this, then held out the partially carved horse. "Finish this. My hands are tired, and you need something to do besides brooding." Cole took the wood and knife, surprised by the trust implied in the gesture. The carving was delicate work requiring patience and precision, qualities he'd cultivated in other contexts but never applied to creation. They worked in companionable silence, passing the horse back and forth, each adding details the other had missed. By the time Doc Mackenzie woke for his watch shift, the toy was finished, a running Mustang, with its mane flying beautiful in its simplicity. Nalen tucked it carefully into her pack. "Samuel will love it." The second day's ride brought them through mountain passes where autumn had already stripped the aspens bare. They stopped only to water the horses and choke down hard biscuits that tasted like regret and determination. Late afternoon found them approaching Albuquerque's outskirts. They skirted the town, avoiding main roads where federal marshals might be stationed. News of the ranch attack would have reached authorities by now, and descriptions would be circulating. Doc Mackenzie's connection lived another 40 miles north, but they'd pushed the horses hard and needed to let them rest. They made camp in an abandoned homestead, walls standing, but roof collapsed, evidence of the territory's harsh mathematics. While the horses grazed and Doc dozed, Nalen scouted the perimeter. She returned with information that made Cole's chest tighten. 4 riders camped 3 miles south, professional armed, watching the road north. Whitmore's men or federal marshals. She shrugged. Does it matter? Either way, they're between us and Santa Fe. Cole studied the failing light, calculating distances and timelines. They could try to slip past in darkness, but if they were spotted, the chase would end badly. Or they could wait, lose precious hours, and hope the riders moved on. Maria Santos had been quiet most of the journey, lost in thoughts about her nephew and what his silence meant. Now she spoke with sudden urgency. "My nephew mentioned a contact. Another clerk woman named Sarah Hartwell. Works in the land office, has access to building records. If we can reach her, she might help. Where's Santa Fe? Lives above a bakery on San Francisco Street." That was helpful if they could reach Santa Fe, which required getting past the riders watching the road. Nalen's voice cut through his planning. "I can draw them off, lead them east while you and Doc ride north. By the time they realize I'm not who they're looking for, you'll be in Santa Fe." "Absolutely not. We stay together. She fixed him with a look that reminded him she'd survived 2 years on her own before their paths crossed. Together, we're slow, obvious, easy to catch. Separated, we're problems they have to solve individually. That's basic tactics. She was right, and Cole hated it. But before he could argue further, Doc McKenzie groaned awake, his face gray with pain. Something's wrong. Left side. Can't breathe right. Cole moved fast, helping the old man sit up, pressing careful fingers against his rib cage. Doc's breathing was shallow and labored, his lips taking on a blue tinge that suggested serious internal problems. Probably cracked ribs from the riding. At my age, cracked ribs can puncture lungs, cause all kinds of complications. The physician's own diagnosis was matter of fact, but the fear underneath was palpable. I need rest, real rest. Not a night on cold ground, but a bed in time to heal. Their timeline had just collapsed. Doc couldn't ride hard, possibly couldn't ride at all without risking his life. And carrying him would slow them impossibly. Maria's voice was steady despite the catastrophe unfolding. I'll take him to my sister's place, 20 miles east. She'll hide him, care for him. You two continue to Santa Fe. Doc started to protest, but a coughing fit stole his words. When it passed, blood flecked his lips. Punctured lung. Probably happened yesterday, been getting worse. He looked at Cole with the clarity of a man who'd spent 50 years reading bodies' stories. I won't make it to Santa Fe, but you can. Get those documents. Make this count for something. The decision was made for them by biology and time. Maria helped Doc onto his horse, the old man barely able to stay upright. They would ride east while Cole and Nayland pushed north. Before she left, Maria pressed a piece of paper into Cole's hand. Sarah Hartwell, bakery on San Francisco Street. Tell her I sent you. Tell her it's about her brother. What about her brother? Maria's smile was grim. He died in one of Whitmore's mines. She's been looking for proof ever since. They parted as darkness fell. Two groups riding opposite directions, each carrying pieces of a desperate plan that was fracturing before it fully formed. Cole and Nayland rode through the night, pushing their horses to the edge of endurance. The riders watching the road never saw them slip past 3 miles to the east, moving through terrain too rough for casual patrols. By dawn of the third day, Santa Fe's adobe buildings appeared on the horizon, golden in the early light. The territorial capital sprawled across hills, a mix of ancient Pueblo architecture and newer American construction that spoke to the collision of cultures defining New Mexico. They entered the city separately, Cole by the northern road and Nayland through the eastern market district, where an Apache woman would draw less immediate attention among the diverse crowd of traders. The bakery on San Francisco Street was easy to find, its ovens already burning the scent of fresh bread, making Cole's empty stomach clench. He tied his horse in the alley and entered through the side door Maria had specified. Sarah Hartwell was 35 and angular, her movements efficient as she pulled loaves from the oven. She looked up as Cole entered, and something in her face suggested she'd been expecting trouble for a long time. Maria Santos sent me. It's about your brother. Sarah set down her bread paddle with exaggerated care. Upstairs, 5 minutes. Don't let anyone see you go up. Cole climbed narrow stairs to a small apartment above the bakery. The space was spartanly furnished but meticulously clean, every surface organized with the precision of someone who controlled what little they could. Nayland arrived 10 minutes later, having circled the block twice to ensure she wasn't followed. Her eyes met Cole's, and the relief of seeing each other alive and free was mutual and unspoken. Sarah joined them, bringing coffee and yesterday's bread. She studied them both with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. Maria said you are going after Whitmore, said you need building plans and guard schedules. Cole nodded. Your brother worked for him? Sarah's face hardened. Thomas worked the Red Hollow mine. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. They said the tunnel collapse that killed him was an accident. But Thomas wrote me letters. He knew the supports were failing, told his foreman was ignored because fixing them would slow production. She pulled out a wooden box, opened it to reveal carefully preserved letters. He died so Silas Whitmore could profit an extra $1,000. So yes, I'll help you destroy him. The building plans she provided were detailed, hand-copied from public records, but annotated with information that could only come from someone who'd studied them obsessively. Guard rotations, entry points, structural weaknesses. Whitmore's office is here, 3rd floor west corner. 2 guards outside his door, more in the building. Security changed after Maria's nephew started asking questions. Nalin leaned over the plans, her finger tracing routes. Windows, Sarah nodded. West wall, but it's a 40-foot drop to the alley below, and the windows are barred. Bars can be removed if you have time and tools. Sarah studied Nalin with new respect. You've done this before. Survival requires skills civilized people pretend don't exist. They spent the day planning, refining, identifying problems and solutions. The territorial building housed multiple offices, which meant traffic during business hours, but also opportunities for confusion. A large party was scheduled that evening, Whitmore celebrating some political victory with territorial officials. That's our window. Security focused on protecting guests, not an empty office. Cole agreed, but something nagged at him. The timing was too convenient, too perfect. Either they were lucky, or they were being led into something. Before he could voice his concern, a knock at the door made them all freeze. Sarah moved to answer, returning moments later with a man in his 20s, nervous and sweating despite the cool afternoon. Maria's nephew, Diego Santos, looking like he'd ridden hard and slept poorly. He collapsed into a chair, accepting water gratefully. They know someone's coming for the documents. Whitmore moved them again this morning, but I saw where it was. Not his office, his home, the safe in his bedroom. Cole's careful plan evaporated. A private home meant different challenges entirely. No public access, tighter security, legitimate reason for guards to shoot intruders on sight. Diego wasn't finished. There's more. The federal marshal arrived yesterday, Wyatt Blackwood. He's investigating the ranch attack, and he's asking about you, specifically Cole. Descriptions match, and someone in Red Hollow identified you. The net was tightening. Federal attention meant they were now fugitives officially, not just in practice. Every hour in Santa Fe increased their risk. How long until Blackwood finds us? Diego shrugged. Could be hours, could be days. But he's thorough and he's honest, which makes him dangerous in different ways than corrupt lawmen. Nayland had been studying the building plans, but now she looked up. If Blackwood's honest, maybe we go to him. Show him what we know, let him get the documents legally. Cole wanted to believe it could be that simple. But 20 years of watching the territory's justice system had taught him that honest lawmen operated within corrupt systems, and corruption always won when the stakes were high enough. We can't risk it. Not with Whitmore's connections. Sarah spoke up quietly. Blackwood investigated my brother's death. Spent 3 weeks gathering evidence. Then the territorial governor shut down the investigation, and the case was closed. Blackwood was furious, but he followed orders. So honest but controllable. That was worse than simple corruption. They had two options: attempt the heist at Whitmore's home, or approach Marshal Blackwood and gamble everything on his integrity overcoming his duty. Diego provided one more piece of information. Blackwood's staying at the Plaza Hotel, room 23. He's been asking to speak with anyone who witnessed the ranch attack. Says he wants to hear all sides before making arrests. Cole and Nayland exchanged looks. The decision needed to be made now, and it would determine whether they had any chance of survival or were simply delaying their inevitable capture. Outside church bells rang the hour. Somewhere in the city, Wyatt Blackwood was building a case that would end with warrants and federal charges. Somewhere else, Silas Whitmore sat in his mansion documents, locked in a safe, confident that money and influence would protect him like they always had. Cole thought about Samuel waiting at the ranch for his sister to return. Thought about the 20 children still sorting ore in Red Hollow's basement. Thought about Canyon DeCelli and the 100 ways that standing aside had led him to this moment. We go to Blackwood, but not to surrender. We offer him a deal. Nayland's eyebrow arched. What kind of deal? The kind where we get the documents and deliver them to him, proving Whitmore's crimes. In exchange, he investigates the massacre, the child slavery, all of it. Diego shook his head. Blackwood doesn't make deals with fugitives. He's legendary for his refusal to negotiate. Then we don't negotiate. We give him a choice: be part of the solution or be part of the cover-up. Men like Blackwood live on their reputations. Threaten that and they listen. It was risky. It was possibly stupid. But it was also the only play that didn't end with them shot or hanged. Sarah stood. I'll arrange a meeting. Neutral ground. Tonight, after the party starts and Whitmore's distracted. She paused at the door. My brother believed in the law. Died believing his complaints would matter, that someone would listen. I've spent 2 years learning he was wrong. But maybe Blackwood's different. After she left, Nolan moved to the window, watching the street below, with the vigilance that had kept her alive. This is a mistake. We should take the documents and run. Mexico's 3 days south. We could disappear. Cole knew she was right to be cautious. But running meant abandoning Samuel, abandoning the other children, abandoning any chance that things might actually change. I'm tired of running. Tired of watching from the sidelines while bad men win because good men don't risk enough. His own words surprised him. 3 years ago, he'd chosen the ranch specifically because it offered isolation from exactly these kinds of moral choices. Now he was riding toward them deliberately. Nellen turned from the window. At Canyon de Chelly, you followed orders and told yourself it wasn't your responsibility. Now you're making decisions that could get us both killed. That's growth, I suppose, even if it's suicidal growth. The edge in her voice wasn't anger. It was something closer to respect mixed with exasperation. If we die doing this, Samuel becomes an orphan again. I know. And the documents stay locked in Whitmore's safe and nothing changes. I know that too. She studied him for a long moment, and whatever she saw made her nod once. Then we meet your honest marshal, and we see if honesty is enough. The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness. They took turns sleeping, eating the food Sarah brought, and rehearsing what they'd say to Blackwood. Every sound from the street below made them tense hands moving toward weapons that wouldn't help if federal marshals kicked down the door. As sunset painted the city orange and gold, Diego returned with news. Blackwood had agreed to meet, but insisted on bringing a deputy. The location was a warehouse near the rail yard, public enough that an ambush would be difficult, but private enough for honest conversation. Cole suspected a trap, but couldn't identify a better alternative. They'd ridden 120 miles, watched Doc McKenzie ride away, possibly dying, and burned every bridge behind them. Forward was the only direction left. They reached the warehouse after dark, approaching from different angles, Nolan covering Cole from a rooftop 50 yards away. If this was an ambush, at least one of them might escape to warn the others. The warehouse was exactly what Diego had described, mostly empty, a few crates stacked against walls, enough shadows to hide threats, but enough open space to see them coming. Wyatt Blackwood stood in the center of the space lamplight, catching the federal marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He was 45 and weathered with the careful posture of someone who'd survived by never fully relaxing. His deputy, younger and nervous, kept one hand near his holstered weapon. Cole entered with his hands visible and empty. Marshal Blackwood, appreciate you taking this meeting. The lawman's face was unreadable. Cole Garrison, wanted for questioning in connection with 10 deaths at a ranch outside Red Hollow. You know I could arrest you right now. You could, but you came alone except for one deputy, and I'm guessing you are curious about what I have to say. Otherwise, we'd be having this conversation in a cell. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Talk fast. My curiosity has limits. Cole laid it out: the child slavery, Whitmore's land grabs, the systematic violence, covering up a conspiracy that reached the territorial governor's office. He didn't mention the documents yet, didn't reveal his entire hand. When he finished, Blackwood was silent for a long moment. That's quite a story. You have proof, working on it. The marshal's laugh was bitter. Son, I've been a lawman 30 years. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every tale about corrupt officials and innocent fugitives. You know what I've learned, guilt comes in degrees, but the law only recognizes two categories: arrested or free. Cole felt the conversation slipping away. Then arrest me, but before you do, answer one question. Did you investigate a mining death 2 years ago? Thomas Hartwell Blackwood's face tightened. I did. Clear negligence, possibly criminal. Case was shut down by the governor's office before I could complete my investigation. White, you know why. Same reason cases always get shut down when powerful men are involved. Money influenced the old boys network that runs this territory. Cole took a step closer. What if I told you I could prove the governor ordered Canyon de Chelly massacre for financial gain, that the same network that protected Whitmore after your mining investigation is built on genocide and child slavery? The marshal's hand moved to his weapon, not drawing but ready. I'd say you're either crazy or desperate, maybe both. The desperate man offering you a chance to actually do what your badge claims you stand for. Blackwood's deputy started to speak, but the marshal raised a hand. Let's say I believe you have evidence, which I don't, but let's pretend. What exactly are you proposing? Give me 72 hours. 3 days. I'll bring you proof that burns down Whitmore's entire operation. In exchange, you investigate properly this time. No shutdowns, no political interference. Real justice. The marshal shook his head. I don't make deals with fugitives. Then we're done here. Cole turned to leave, hoping his bluff would land. Blackwood's voice stopped him at the door. Wait, part 2, segment 4, 986 words. Continuing. The marshal studied Cole for a long moment, calculations running behind those weathered eyes. 72 hours. You bring me evidence, real evidence, not rumors or theories, and I'll investigate. But if you're running a game, if this is just a fugitive trying to buy time, I'll hunt you to Mexico and back. Cole met his gaze. Fair enough. One more thing. The ranch attack. Those men you killed. Were they acting in self-defense or execution? Self-defense. They came for murder. We defended our home. Blackwood absorbed this, then nodded slowly. Clock starts now, 72 hours. Don't make me regret this. The marshal and his deputy left first, disappearing into the night. Cole waited 5 minutes before signaling Nayland down from her perch. She materialized from shadows like smoke taking form. You trust him? No, but he's our best option, which tells you how few options we have. They returned to Sarah's apartment through back alleys, avoiding main streets, where witnesses might remember an Apache woman and a limping white man traveling together. The city was alive with evening activity, cantinas, spilling music and laughter shops closing for the night, the eternal rhythm of people living lives that didn't include desperate fugitives and impossible missions. Sarah was waiting with fresh information from Diego. Whitmore's party is in full swing. Half the territorial government is there, including the governor. Security's focused on the mansion. Nolan spread the building plans across the table one more time, which means his office downtown is vulnerable. If the documents are really in his home safe, like Diego said, there might be copies in the office. Or something else we can use. It was thin reasoning, but they were working with thin materials. Cole studied the plans, finding new details he'd missed earlier. 3rd floor west corner. 2 guards outside the door, Diego said. But there's a maintenance shaft here, runs from the basement to the roof. Narrow, probably barely wide enough for a person, but it bypasses the guards entirely. Sarah leaned in. That shaft is for chimney access in winter. It'll be filthy, possibly unstable. And it opens into the hallway, not the office itself. One problem at a time. They spent another hour refining the plan. Cole would enter through the maintenance shaft while Nalin created a distraction at street level. Nothing violent, just enough commotion to draw guard attention away from the building's interior. Sarah would watch from the bakery, ready to signal if federal marshals or Whitmore's men approached. Diego would stay clear, his position as a clerk too valuable to risk on a direct operation. But he provided one last piece of intelligence. Whitmore's safe. If it's the same model as his office safe, it's a Yale 1880. Combination lock, 4 numbers. Supposedly unpickable. Cole had cracked Yale safes during the war, military and intelligence work that seemed like another lifetime. The skills were rusty but retrievable. How long to crack it? 10 minutes if I'm lucky, 30 if I'm not. Nolan's voice was flat. You won't have 30 minutes. Guards rotate every hour. If you're in that office when the next shift comes, you're caught. So I'll be lucky. They moved out separately as midnight approached. The party at Whitmore's mansion was loud enough to hear from 6 blocks away, the sound of people who believed themselves untouchable, celebrating their invulnerability. Cole reached the territorial building from the north, entering through a service entrance Sarah had indicated would be unlocked. The basement was exactly as described, damp, dark, and smelling of old paper and mildew. The maintenance shaft was barely visible, a narrow opening behind a stack of crates. He squeezed into the shaft, his broad shoulders scraping against walls never designed for adult passage. The climb was vertical, metal rungs slick with decades of soot and grease. Each movement made noise, small sounds that seemed enormous in the confined space. 3rd floor took 5 minutes of careful climbing. The shaft opened into a hallway through a panel that hadn't been properly secured. Cole eased it open, listening for guards. Voices to the left, 2 men talking about a card game. To the right, silence. He moved right toward where the plans indicated Whitmore's office waited. The door was locked, but the lock was simple, civilian grade, nothing like the military security Cole had defeated during the war. 30 seconds with a pick, and the door swung open. Whitmore's office was opulent in ways that spoke to stolen wealth. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs, maps of the territory marked with property acquisitions. The safe was behind a painting exactly where expensive men always hid their secrets. Cole knelt before it, ear pressed to the cool metal fingers working the combination dial. The first number came after 3 minutes. The second took 5 more. The third wouldn't come at all. Something was different about this lock, some modification that defeated his technique. Outside, footsteps approached. Guard rotation early, or Cole's timing was worse than he'd calculated. He had maybe 30 seconds before the door opened. Not enough time to crack the safe, not enough time to escape through the maintenance shaft, barely enough time to hide. The office had one closet packed with files and supplies. Cole wedged himself inside, pulling the door nearly closed, leaving just enough gap to see through. 2 guards entered their conversation, continuing from the hallway. Heard Blackwood's looking for the man who killed Brennan's crew. Got descriptions, even knows his name. The other guard laughed. Garrison won't last long. Nobody runs from Blackwood. Man's like a bloodhound. They made a circuit of the office, checking the window locks, confirming nothing was disturbed. Cole's heart hammered against his ribs, certain they'd hear of it, certain they'd open the closet and find him. But they finished their check and left, locking the door behind them. Cole waited 5 minutes before emerging, his shirt soaked with sweat. The safe still waited, its combination stubbornly resistant. He returned to it with renewed focus, trying different techniques, different approaches. After 15 more minutes, the 4th number clicked into place. The safe door swung open. Inside were documents, dozens of them organized with meticulous care. Property deeds, financial records, correspondence. Cole gathered what he could, stuffing papers into his shirt, looking for anything that tied Whitmore directly to the massacre. Then he found a leather journal, its pages filled with handwritten notes. He flipped through, quickly seeing dates, names, amounts of money, and there, dated September 1880, an entry that made his blood run cold. Canyon de Chelly operation completed. 147 targets eliminated. Governor Thompson confirmed payment of $50,000. Railroad access secured. Thornton performed adequately, will use again for future clearances. This was it. Written proof in Whitmore's own hand, connecting him to the massacre, to the governor, to everything. Cole closed the safe, restored the painting, and moved toward the maintenance shaft. Every instinct screamed at him to run to get these documents to Blackwood immediately. But as he reached the shaft opening, voices erupted in the hallway. Not guards this time, something urgent, multiple men shouting. Through the door's crack, Cole saw federal marshals flooding the building, at least a dozen weapons drawn, moving with military precision. Blackwood had betrayed them. The honest marshal had set a trap, and Cole had walked into it willingly. Cole's hand tightened on the documents as boots thundered closer. The maintenance shaft offered escape, but entering it now would create noise that would draw every marshal in the building straight to him. The window was barred, the door blocked by armed men, the safe's false bottom where he crouched, offering temporary concealment at best. Then a voice cut through the chaos, familiar and carrying authority, that made the rushing footsteps slow. Marshal Blackwood, federal authority. This building is now under investigation for harboring evidence of territorial corruption. All personnel are to evacuate immediately while we secure the premises. Cole's confusion lasted only a heartbeat before understanding crashed through. This wasn't betrayal. This was cover. Blackwood had brought his men to create legitimate reason for searching the building, giving Cole's theft the veneer of official investigation. The guards' voices rose in protest, demanding to see warrants, threatening to contact the governor. Blackwood's response was iron-wrapped in legal procedure. The warrant's being drawn as we speak. You can cooperate now, or you can explain to a federal judge why you obstructed an investigation. Your choice, but choose fast. The commotion moved toward the stairs, guards being herded out by marshals who knew exactly how to apply pressure without crossing into illegal detention. Within 5 minutes, the building had emptied except for the marshals conducting their search. Cole waited another 10 minutes before emerging from the safe's hidden compartment. His shirt bulged with stolen documents, the journal pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. The hallway was clear. He moved toward the maintenance shaft, every nerve screaming warning, certain this was still a trap somehow. A marshal appeared from a side office, young and startled. Their eyes met for a frozen moment. The deputy's hand moved toward his weapon, training overriding whatever orders Blackwood might have given. Cole's hand was faster, catching the deputy's wrist before the gun cleared leather. They grappled silently, neither wanting to alert others, both knowing discovery meant complications neither could afford. The deputy was 20 years younger, but Cole had desperation in the high ground. He swept the younger man's legs, controlled the fall to minimize noise, and struck once with precision that spoke to training the cavalry had burned into his muscle memory. The deputy went limp. Not dead, just unconscious, his breathing steady, but his participation in tonight's events concluded. Cole dragged him into a closet, arranged him in a position that suggested he'd been ambushed, rather than overpowered in fair combat. Then he entered the maintenance shaft, descending as fast as the narrow space allowed. The basement was chaos marshals, searching through old records, creating the thorough mess that would justify their intrusion to any oversight committee. None of them looked at Cole as he emerged from behind the crates, his stolen clothes and coating of soot making him appear like just another marshal doing dirty work. He walked out the service entrance into night air that tasted like temporary freedom. Nolan materialized from shadows 2 blocks away, her expression tight. "I saw the marshals arrive. Thought Blackwood had sold us." Cole showed her the documents, the journal, everything that had cost them so much to acquire. "He gave us cover, made our theft look like official investigation. Now we've got 72 hours to make this count before the story unravels." They returned to Sarah's apartment through routes that avoided even the possibility of surveillance. The baker was waiting with food and worry in equal measure. Diego arrived minutes later, breathless and excited. "Blackwood's locked down the territorial building. He's claiming suspicion of embezzlement, conducting a full audit of every office, including Whitmore's. The governor's furious, but can't interfere without looking guilty himself." Nolan spread the documents across the table, organizing them with practiced efficiency. Property deeds showed the pattern: ranchers refusing to sell, then dying in convenient accidents, their land acquired by Whitmore for fractions of value. Financial records traced money from Whitmore to the governor, payments labeled consulting fees that no consulting could justify. And the journal. The journal was a confession written by a man who'd never expected to face consequences. Each entry a catalog of crimes committed with bureaucratic precision. Sarah read through them with shaking hands, stopping at an entry from 2 years prior. Thomas Hartwell becoming problematic. Complaints about mine safety reaching Santa Fe. Arrange accident. Make it look like tunnel collapse. Standard severance to family should prevent questions. Her brother's murder planned and executed, reduced to 3 sentences and a reminder to pay blood money. Cole watched her face transform, grief hardening into something that would either destroy her or forge her into something new. He'd seen that transformation in mirrors after Canyon DeCelli, recognized it as the moment when a person chose between collapse and becoming someone capable of surviving what shouldn't be survivable. Sarah set down the paper with exaggerated care. "When do we take this to Blackwood Dawn? Give him time to establish his investigation's legitimacy, then we deliver evidence that transforms a fishing expedition into an ironclad case." Diego was still reading, his face growing paler with each page. "This goes higher than the governor, railroad executives, federal judges, even 2 congressmen. Whitmore's been building a network for years, which means bringing him down brings down everyone connected to him. That's leverage, but it's also danger." Nolan had been quiet, studying a map of the territory that Sarah kept pinned to one wall. Now she spoke, her finger tracing lines between properties Whitmore had acquired. "He's not finished. Look at the pattern. He's built a corridor from Red Hollow to the Rio Grande. When the railroad comes, he'll control every water source, every station. Stop everything the railroad needs to operate." Cole saw it now, the larger plan. Whitmore wasn't just stealing land. He was positioning himself to become the most powerful man in the territory, essential to the railroad's success, untouchable because bringing him down would threaten millions in railroad investment. They have 3 days before Blackwood's protection expires. 3 days before this evidence would mean nothing because the people it implicated would have time to destroy records, silence witnesses, and rebuild their defenses. We need more than documents. We need Whitmore himself in federal custody, unable to coordinate the cover-up. That's not our job. We give Blackwood the evidence, let him make arrests. Nayland shook her head. You trust him that much? After how many honest lawmen have looked the other way while Whitmore killed and stole? Sarah's voice cut through their argument. Diego, where is Whitmore right now? Still at his mansion. Party's winding down, but he'll be there until morning at least. Then we go there, tonight. Get him talking, get a confession, deliver him and the evidence together. Cole wanted to argue it was too risky, too complicated, that they'd already pushed their luck past any reasonable limit. But he looked at the documents spread across the table, thought about Samuel, waiting for his sister, thought about 20 children sorting ore in basements, and realized Sarah was right. Evidence without arrest gave powerful men time to escape. But Whitmore in custody confessing because he didn't know his empire was already crumbling, that ended the conspiracy in one stroke. How do we get into a mansion with private security and a party full of witnesses? Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. I used to cater events before my brother died. I know those houses know how they work. Service entrance, kitchen staff, delivery schedules. We go in as hired help, get close to Whitmore, make him talk. It was insane enough to work, which meant it was likely insane enough to fail spectacularly. They spent the remaining night hours preparing. Sarah produced server uniforms from her catering days, altered them to fit Cole and Nayland well enough to pass casual inspection. Diego forged delivery papers for a champagne order that Whitmore's staff would be expecting. As dawn broke, they moved toward the mansion on the hill where the territorial elite lived, behind walls that separated them from the consequences of their greed. The estate sprawled across 5 acres gardens and courtyards surrounding a 3-story adobe structure that mixed Pueblo architecture with imported Eastern opulence. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but the service entrance saw steady traffic as caterers and staff dealt with the aftermath of last night's party. Cole and Nayland entered with a load of empty champagne crates. Their faces lowered their movements, those of tired workers too focused on labor to be threats. The kitchen was chaos, staff arguing about missing inventory and broken glassware, nobody paying attention to 2 more bodies hauling boxes. They moved deeper into the house following the layout Sarah had sketched from memory. Whitmore's study was on the 2nd floor private and removed from the public spaces where the party had occurred. The hallway outside was empty, morning light slanting through windows that overlooked gardens where workers trimmed roses and swept paths. Cole tried the door, found it locked, and was reaching for his picks when it swung open from inside. Silas Whitmore stood in the doorway, immaculate even at dawn, his eyes sharp and alert despite the late night. Behind him, Captain James Thornton rose from a chair, hand moving to the pistol at his hip. The moment of recognition was mutual and electric. Whitmore's face transformed from surprise to something that might have been respect, if respect could carry that much malice. "Mr. Garrison, I wondered if you'd be clever enough to come here, and you brought the Apache woman. How convenient." Thornton moved to block the door's other side, trapping Cole and Nayland in the frame. His voice carried the flat affect of someone who'd killed often enough that it had become routine. "Blackwood told us to expect something. Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to walk into a trap." Understanding arrived with the weight of catastrophe. Blackwood hadn't been protecting them. He'd been hurting them exactly where Whitmore wanted them, setting up a scenario where 2 fugitives broke into a private home and were killed in self-defense. Whitmore gestured them inside with exaggerated courtesy. "Please come in. Since you've gone to such effort to visit, let's make this comfortable." The study was lined with books no one had read, trophies no one had earned, the accumulated display of a man who measured worth in possessions. A safe stood open in the corner, its contents visible. More documents, more evidence, all the proof they'd thought they were sealing last night sitting right here. "You're wondering about the documents you took from my office. Those were copies carefully prepared to lead you exactly where we needed you. The real evidence has always been here, and here it stays." Thornton closed the door behind them, the sound of it latching, carrying finality. 4 guards appeared from adjoining rooms, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. Professional security waiting for their employer's signal. Nayland's hand edged toward the knife at her hip, but Cole caught her wrist. Any movement toward weapons now would end with them dead before they could defend themselves. Whitmore settled into a leather chair, entirely at ease. "You've been remarkably persistent. Most people give up after the first warning. But you fought off Brennan's men, eluded federal marshals, even managed to steal from my office. Impressive, truly. But ultimately futile." He leaned forward, and the mask of civility slipped to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. "This territory belongs to me. Every acre, every water source, every politician and lawman. I've built this over 20 years, and no crippled cavalry deserter and his Apache whore are going to tear it down. The racial slur was calculated, designed to provoke. Cole felt Nayland tense beside him, but kept his own voice level. We have evidence. Blackwood has documents proving everything: the massacre orders, the murdered ranchers, the child slavery. You can kill us, but the case is already built. Whitmore's laugh was genuine amusement. You mean the documents Blackwood brought me this morning? The ones I've already burned? Or perhaps you mean the testimony of Maria Santos's nephew, who's currently enjoying federal custody on embezzlement charges. Diego had been arrested. The safety net they'd counted on had been cut while they were busy walking into traps. Thornton spoke from his position, blocking the door. We knew you'd come for documents. Knew you'd trust an honest marshal, because that's what desperate people do. They trust the systems that have already failed them. So we gave you exactly what you expected to find. Cole's mind raced through options, finding nothing. They were unarmed, outnumbered in the heart of Whitmore's fortress. Even if they fought their way out of this room, guards filled the house and grounds. Nolan's voice carried steel underneath silk. You're confident for a man whose empire is built on paper and fear. Paper burns, fear fades. What's left when those are gone? Whitmore's expression darkened. What's left is power. Real power. The kind that survives investigations and scandals. Because I own the people who conduct investigations and define scandals. He stood moving toward them with the predator's patience of someone who knew the kill was assured. Here's what happens now. You two die. Tragic break-in, killed in self-defense by my security. The documents you stole, forgeries obviously planted by Apache terrorists trying to destabilize territorial authority. Your ranch already seized for unpaid taxes. Those children you think you're saving, they'll work my mines until they die or become too broken to be useful. Each word was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing every hope they'd carried into this confrontation. And that boy Samuel, he'll disappear into the same system that produced his sister. Maybe in 10 years he'll be standing where you are now, realizing that fighting back was always pointless. It was the mention of Samuel that shifted something in Nayland. Cole felt it in the minute change of her stance, the way her breathing altered from fear to something colder and more dangerous. You talk about power like it's permanent, but I've watched empires fall. My people's empire fell. The Spanish Empire fell. Yours will too, and men like you will be forgotten, except as cautionary tales about hubris. She took a step forward, and though 4 guards had weapons, and she had only words, Whitmore unconsciously stepped back. You want to kill us? Do it. But know this, we're not the last. Others will come. Some we've already inspired, some who'll be inspired by our deaths. Your fear will grow, not fade, because you'll spend every day wondering which servant, which hired gun, which smiling politician has decided you've become too dangerous to support. Whitmore's hand shook as he raised it to signal the guards. But before he could give the order, glass exploded inward from the window overlooking the garden. Federal marshals poured through the opening, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that reduced the room to frozen confusion. Wyatt Blackwood came through the door, deputies behind him, his face carrying no trace of the corruption Whitmore had described. Silas Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and violations of the federal racketeering statute. Whitmore's face transformed from confidence to incomprehension to rage in the space of seconds. You said you'd handle this. You promised. Blackwood's smile was colder than winter in the Sangre de Cristos. I promised to make you believe I was in your pocket. Made you so confident you'd confess everything to the people you thought you'd already beaten. Did you really think I'd burn evidence that I'd let a child trafficker walk because he paid well? The marshal produced a small device from his pocket at Metal and Wire, something technological that Cole didn't immediately recognize. Edison's new recording phonograph. Been in that wall safe since yesterday, capturing every word. You just confessed to ordering Canyon DeCelli, to murdering Thomas Hartwell, to everything. And unlike documents, this is your voice, your words, unambiguous and damning. The recording had been the trap, but not for Cole and Nayland. They'd been bait dangled to make Whitmore reveal himself completely confident in his power and willing to monologue like villains do when they think they've won. Thornton moved for his weapon, but 3 deputies had rifles aimed at his chest before his hand reached the grip. The captain froze, calculating odds, finding nothing favorable. You'll never make this stick. The governor is already in federal custody. Arrested at dawn, apparently he's very eager to testify against you in exchange for leniency. The whole conspiracy was collapsing in real time, each arrest triggering the next. The network Whitmore had spent 20 years building, dissolving as its members scrambled to save themselves. Guards who moments ago had been ready to kill on Whitmore's command now stepped back suddenly. Civilians who knew nothing, saw nothing would swear in court. They were just doing their jobs. Blackwood's deputies moved through the house with practiced efficiency, securing rooms, confiscating documents, transforming a private mansion into a federal crime scene. The marshal approached Cole and Nolan, his expression unreadable. "You two are still fugitives. Still killed 10 men at that ranch. But given the circumstances and the evidence you helped provide, I'm inclined to rule the killings just justified self-defense." He paused. "Doesn't mean you're free and clear. There'll be hearings, testimony, probably a territorial review, but you'll face them as witnesses, not defendants." Cole felt Nolan's hand find his, their fingers interlocking with the grip of people who'd survived something that should have killed them. "What about the children?" The ones in Red Hollow. Blackwood's face softened minutely. "Raid's already underway. 23 children being evacuated to federal custody as we speak. They'll be returned to families where possible, placed in schools otherwise. The mines are being shut down, investigated, prosecuted." It was more than they dared hope for, but hope had been in short supply for so long that accepting victory felt dangerous premature. The transport back to Santa Fe happened in a blur. Cole and Nayland rode in a federal wagon, not prisoners, but not quite free, their status ambiguous and dependent on a legal system they had little reason to trust. Sarah met them at the marshal's office with news that Diego had already been released, the embezzlement charges revealed as fabricated leverage that collapsed the moment Whitmore's arrest became public. The hearings began within days. Cole testified about the ranch attack, about Brennan's child slavery operation, about everything he'd witnessed since buying Nalin's freedom in that Red Hollow saloon. Nalin testified about Canyon DeShelley, about her family's murder, about the systematic violence that had destroyed her people for profit. Samuel testified, too, brought in under federal protection, his small voice describing the basement, where children sorted ore until their hands bled, where guards used brands and whips to maintain discipline, where hope was a luxury no one could afford. 3 weeks into the proceedings, Doc McKenzie finally arrived. Maria Santos drove the wagon slowly, the old physician propped against cushions, his face gaunt but his eyes sharp. The punctured lung had healed under Maria's sister's care, 3 weeks of bed rest, daily poultices, and the kind of stubborn determination that had kept him alive this long. He'd lost 20 pounds and couldn't walk more than a few steps without wheezing, but he'd insisted on coming for the verdicts. Maria helped him into the courthouse gallery where he sat between Cole and Nalin like a general watching his soldiers finish the war he'd started. The territorial jury took 4 hours to return verdicts after 6 weeks of testimony. Cole testified about the ranch attack, about Brennan's child slavery operation, about everything he'd witnessed since buying Nalin's freedom in that Red Hollow saloon. Nalin testified about Canyon DeShelley, about her family's murder, about the systematic violence that had destroyed her people for profit. Samuel testified too, brought in under federal protection, his small voice describing the basement where children sorted ore until their hands bled, where guards used brands and whips to maintain discipline, where hope was a luxury no one could afford. The territorial jury took 4 hours to return verdicts. Guilty on all counts. Whitmore faced federal prison, likely for the remainder of his life. Thornton faced execution for war crimes and murder. The governor faced impeachment and criminal charges. 37 other officials and businessmen faced various prosecutions. And Cole and Nayland walked free. Their actions ruled justified. Their status changed from fugitives to citizens whose courage had exposed the corruption others had ignored for decades. They returned to the ranch 6 weeks after leaving it, riding through familiar terrain that looked different somehow, as if justice had altered the landscape's geometry. The ranch house had been repaired by neighbors, a community effort that spoke to the solidarity forged in shared struggle. Thompson and the other ranchers who'd fought beside them had maintained the property, fed the horses, kept everything ready for their return. Samuel ran from the house the moment he heard horses approaching, his small body crashing into Nayland with enough force to knock them both to the ground. Brother and sister tangled together, laughing and crying Apache words mixing with English in a celebration that transcended language. The first winter tested them. Word of Whitmore's conviction spread, but so did resentment among settlers who'd profited from his system. 3 families left refusing to share water rights with savages. Others stayed but kept their distance, waiting to see if this fragile peace would hold or shatter like so many before it. Cole and Nayland worked through the cold months to prove it could work. They organized the first community council equal representation for Apache Mexican and white families. Decisions about water land use and conflict resolution required unanimous consent. It was slow, frustrating, often maddening, but it worked. By spring, Maria Santos had expanded her trading post with goods from all 3 cultures. Apache women sold traditional medicines alongside Mexican textiles and American tools. The profits were shared, the respect mutual, the future uncertain but possible. The integrated school opened that fall with 12 students. Samuel, now 9, and remarkably composed for someone who'd survived what he had helped translate when Apache children struggled with English. Taka, barely walking, would toddle between the desks, a living symbol of what they were building, a generation that wouldn't know the hatreds that had nearly destroyed their parents. The first years weren't easy. A drought in '84 nearly broke them. A conflict over grazing rights almost sparked violence. A territorial inspector tried to shut down the school for violating segregation norms. Each time the community held. Not because everyone agreed, but because they'd learned that fracturing meant dying individually and collectively. Samuel grew into his role as bridge builder. By 16, his fluency in Apache Spanish and English made him essential. When the drought of '88 threatened to pit families against each other over water, it was Samuel who negotiated the rationing system that saved everyone. The young man who'd once sorted ore in a basement now shaped the future of the basin. Taka bloomed like the flower she was named for. From her mother, she learned the healing traditions of the Apache, which plants stopped bleeding, which eased pain, which brought sleep to the traumatized. From her father, she learned patience with animals, the way a gentle hand could calm even the most terrified horse. By 12, she was treating livestock across the territory, her competence transcending the prejudices that still lingered. Doc Mackenzie lasted 7 more years, long enough to see the school graduate its first class, long enough to deliver Nayland and Cole's second child, a son they'd named Thomas, after the physician and Sarah Hartwell's brother. He died in his sleep at 83, surrounded by 3 generations of people whose lives he'd touched. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the basin, where wildflowers bloomed each spring and wind carried messages between the living and the dead. His headstone bore a simple inscription: "He healed bodies and helped heal a broken land." Months became seasons. The ranch prospered as Cole's horse breeding reputation grew, as Nolan's healing practice drew patients from across the basin, as Samuel grew taller and stronger and started smiling without needing a reason. The territorial government reformed under federal oversight. New officials replaced those who'd been arrested. Laws changed protections, strengthened oversight, increased. It wasn't perfect, systems never were, but it was better, measurably and tangibly better. Spring arrived with wildflowers blooming across the basin, purple and yellow against white sand, a riot of color where emptiness had been. Nolan laughed when she saw them, the first time Cole had heard her laugh, with pure joy. She knelt among the flowers, touching petals with reverent fingers. "My mother said wildflowers are survivors. They wait through drought and fire, dormant, but not dead, and when conditions finally allow, they explode into beauty that makes you forget they were ever buried." Cole joined her, his leg protesting the kneeling, but his heart insisting. "Wildflower Ridge, that's what we'll call this place." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face, but they were different tears than those she'd shed in grief. These carried hope and possibility, and the radical audacity of believing tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Samuel ran toward them through the flowers, his laughter carrying on desert wind, his arms spread wide like he could embrace the entire basin. "Sister, Uncle Cole, look, it's everywhere." The boy crashed into them both, tangling them together in the flowers. 3 people who'd survived what should have killed them, learning to live instead of merely survive. That evening, as sunset painted the basin gold and orange, Cole and Nayland stood on the porch watching their makeshift family, Samuel teaching younger children from Maria's extended family to ride Doc Mackenzie, telling stories that grew more exaggerated, with each retelling at Thompson and the other ranchers planning irrigation projects that would benefit everyone. Nalen's hand rested on her stomach, and Cole knew before she spoke what she would say. I'm pregnant. About 2 months, maybe a little more. The world stopped, restarted, became entirely new in the space between heartbeats. How long have you known? I suspected before we left for Santa Fe. My body felt different, wrong timing for my monthly cycle. But I was certain the night before the mansion I woke up sick and I knew. She looked at him, eyes fierce. I didn't tell you because if we died, I didn't want you carrying that particular guilt. And if we survived, well, some news waits better than others. Cole's throat tightened. You rode hard for 3 days, climbed through maintenance shafts, fought armed men all while carrying our child. Yes, she touched his face. I'm Apache. My grandmother rode into battle pregnant and gave birth between skirmishes. Women are stronger than men give us credit for. She turned to face him fully. But we didn't die. We survived and fought and won. And now this child gets to be born into a world slightly less broken than the one we inherited. Cole's hand joined hers on her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I can't protect them from everything out there? No one can protect anyone from everything. But you can teach them to stand up when standing is hard, to fight back when fighting seems impossible, to choose tomorrow over yesterday. The baby was born in January, a daughter they named Taka Wildflower in Apache. She came screaming into a world that had tried to kill her parents, into a community that had formed in defiance of those who wanted them scattered and afraid. Samuel appointed himself her protector, a role he took with 8-year-old seriousness that made adults smile and reminded everyone that children understood survival in ways adults often forgot. Years passed. The railroad came bringing prosperity, but also new challenges. Wildflower Ridge became known throughout the territory as the place where Apache Mexican and white families lived together, proving that coexistence wasn't just possible, but beneficial. Cole watched his daughter grow, watched Samuel become a young man who moved between cultures with grace their generation had been denied. Watched Nalene become a leader whose voice carried weight in territorial councils. He watched the scars on all of them, physical and emotional, fade without disappearing, becoming part of their stories instead of their entire stories. Doc McKenzie died peacefully at 83, surrounded by people who loved him. His last words a joke about finally getting to rest. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the basin where wildflowers bloomed each spring and wind carried messages between living and dead. Maria Santos expanded her store into a trading post that employed 30 people and became the economic heart of the region. Sarah Hartwell published her brother's letters sparking reforms in mining safety that saved lives across the territory. And on quiet evenings, when the basin settled into twilight, Cole and Nalen would stand on their porch watching their children play, watching their community thrive, watching wildflowers bloom where blood had soaked the sand. One such evening, 20 years after that September night, when Cole had ridden into darkness to save a boy he didn't know, Nalen asked the question that had been building between them for decades. Do you still see them, your captains, the women who died, the choices you made? Cole considered his answer carefully, every day. But they're not the only things I see anymore. I see Samuel graduating from that integrated school we built. I see Taka learning Apache healing traditions from you. I see this community we helped create, imperfect, but trying. He took her hand, calloused from decades of work, but still capable of gentleness. The past doesn't disappear, but it stops being the only story we tell. As darkness settled over Wildflower Ridge, lights appeared in windows across the basin. Each light represented a family, a story, a choice to keep going despite everything that said stopping would be easier. Samuel rode up with Taka, both of them laughing about something only siblings found funny. They were heading into town for a dance leave stretching before them, full of possibilities their parents had fought to make real. Nalen watched them go, then turned to Cole. We did this. We built something that lasts. We survived long enough for others to build on what we started. That's all anyone can do. The wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, the eternal smell of a desert that killed and nurtured in equal measure. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other, and somewhere further still, trains rolled toward futures no one could predict, but everyone hoped would be better. Cole thought about the man he'd been standing guard while horror unfolded, following orders, because questioning them seemed harder than obedience. He thought about the man he'd become, someone who'd learned that the hardest fights were the ones worth having, that standing up mattered even when success seemed impossible. He thought about Nolan, who'd chosen to see his potential instead of just his past, who'd risked everything to save her brother and ended up helping save a community. Most of all, he thought about the wildflowers that bloomed each spring, proving that even in the harshest environments, beauty could emerge from the places where pain had taken root. The desert blooms not, despite the fire, but because of it. Nellen's voice echoed her words from years ago, and Cole realized she wasn't talking about flowers anymore. She was talking about them, about everyone who'd survived trauma and chosen to build anyway, to love anyway, to hope anyway. They stood on their porch as stars emerged, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a light that still burned decades later. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new choices between giving up and pushing forward. But tonight they had this proof that broken people could heal, that enemies could become family, that justice was possible, even when the powerful seemed untouchable. Tomorrow they would wake and tend their horses, heal their community's wounds, teach their children that the past informed the future without dictating it. But tonight they simply stood together and watching their legacy bloom across a basin that had once held only emptiness and despair, now filled with laughter and light and the radical possibility that things could actually get better. The wildflowers would bloom again come spring. They always did, and that was enough.